Hello, my friends. And the latest shift in Donald Trump's rhetoric once again reveals the fundamental unseriousness of Western policymaking when it comes to Ukraine. Now, Trump is saying that Ukraine must hold elections, that Zelensky must accept certain realities, and that the ongoing proposals to end this war, proposals that the U.S., Europe, and Kiev themselves have recycled endlessly, must be taken seriously. Yet not a single one of these proposals even remotely aligns with Russia's clear and consistent objectives. They are fantasy projects created by Western bureaucrats determined to pretend that their fading influence can reverse strategic defeat. Russia sees these plans for what they are: political theater. The West pretends the war is going well for Ukraine, even as Russia makes significant tactical and operational gains across the entire front. The Western media insists that Russian losses are catastrophic and that Kiev still has a viable chance, but on the ground, the reality is the opposite. Russia holds the initiative. It dictates tempo everywhere. The Western narrative is collapsing under pressure from events they can no longer deny. Trump, characteristically, swings back and forth on what he claims to believe. Not long ago, he said Ukraine could win, that Russia's economy was collapsing, and that Russian casualties were unimaginable. Now suddenly he has awakened to the obvious. Ukraine is losing, NATO membership will never happen, and corruption that has always defined the Kiev regime is suddenly shocking just because the U.S. needs a reason to distance itself from the failure. Meanwhile, Washington continues to reshuffle personnel to disguise policy incoherence. Kellogg is out. Dan Driscoll, a political loyalist with no diplomatic experience, steps in. This is not a diplomat. This is a babysitter for the regime in Kyiv. His credentials come from Harvard friendships, not competence. The result? No understanding of Russia, no geopolitical depth, and a reliance on pure improvisation. Trump's 28-point peace plan, along with the stack of half-baked peace ideas thrown at Moscow like playing cards, was instantly rejected by everyone who matters. Russia dismissed it politely. Zelensky defiantly rejected it. Europeans howled, absolutely not. The Pentagon, intelligence services, military-industrial complex, and Western media didn't even need to respond. Their refusal was baked in. Ultimately, the only people who pretended this was serious were Trump, Vance, and a few advisors. So the peace process is declared dead only for a new, equally hopeless poison pill proposal to emerge days later. Moscow tolerates this diplomatic charade because it keeps the global South and BRICS aligned behind Russia's narrative of responsibility that Moscow is open to peace, but on terms that reflect battlefield realities. And those battlefield realities are decisive. The Russian steamroller continues without pause. European leaders continue visiting Zelensky to provide delusional reassurance, telling him victory is still possible, ignoring the obvious strategic collapse of Ukrainian defenses. None of their plans reflect facts on the ground. Not one even contemplates Russia's rightful and irreversible authority in the new security order of Eastern Europe. Russian Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov confirmed the undeniable. Russian advances are happening along the entire front line. Towns like Mirnograd, Dmitrov, adjacent to Prask in the Donetsk region, are surrounded. Putin has already declared his terms. Russia will take all of the Donbass by force if Kyiv does not surrender. There is no ambiguity. Donbass is Russia, and Moscow will enforce that truth. Mirnograd is just the final contraction of a collapsing cauldron. Prask fell weeks ago, despite Kiev's propaganda denials that even Western media can no longer repeat with a straight face. The Ukrainian units that fled Prask were pushed deeper into an even worse encirclement. They have no supply lines, no logistics. Many survive only on food and ammunition, occasionally delivered by drone, a miserable, unsustainable situation. Russia offers surrender when rejected. Buildings simply disappear under glide bombs. As those positions break, Russia is already moving beyond them, north and northwest towards Slavyansk. The page is turning. The chapter's already written. Simultaneous Russian advances are reshaping the battlefield across Donetsk, Lyman, Kupiansk, Konstantinovka, everywhere that once formed the core of Ukraine's defensive lines. Encirclements are forming exactly as Russia has designed, partial pockets that slowly constrict into full cauldrons. Ukrainian manpower is being fed into city fights that can no longer be reinforced or relieved. But nowhere is the collapse more dramatic than Zaporozhye. Russian forces have surged into Guliai-Polye, a major stronghold long considered key to Ukrainian defense in the south. Fighting is already inside the city proper, and the encirclement is forming faster than analysts predicted. Rational commanders would withdraw, but Kyiv's leadership, obsessed with political optics, demands suicidal stands. Once Guliai-Polye falls, the road to Zaporozhye city opens. The city becomes inevitable, likely this coming spring. At the same time, Russia's strategic strike campaign has escalated to levels Ukraine cannot withstand. Nights of 700, then 1,000 missiles and drones, hitting power grids, the railway lines, the drone manufacturing centers, even infrastructure around Kyiv itself. The railway system, Ukraine's military lifeline, is being taken apart. Repair crews can no longer keep up. Power outages are approaching 16 hours a day. Industries are freezing. Transport is breaking. The country is entering irreversible systemic failure. This is what overwhelming force looks like. Meanwhile, Western think tanks like the Institute for the Study of War twist themselves into delusional knots. They admit Russian tactical superiority while claiming none of this is strategically significant. They claim Russia might someday take cities that Russia already controls. When Russia captures Kyiv, they will insist Kyiv was merely symbolic. They cling to inflated fantasies of Russian casualties, refusing to confront the catastrophic Ukrainian losses, several times higher, utterly unsustainable, hidden only to keep conscripts fighting and money flowing to oligarchs. Russia fights with purpose. Ukraine fights because NATO says no retreat, regardless of lives lost. As Ukraine collapses, the Trump administration pivots toward new geopolitical adventures, Venezuela, Taiwan, insisting the U.S. can act as a neutral mediator between Europe and Russia, as if America did not create this war in the first place. Trump's doctrine admits retreat, but refuses to accept multipolar reality. It demands Europe own the defeat, while America pretends innocence. We never wanted this war. We merely trained the army, armed it, and sanctioned Russia into strategic resurgence. This new national security strategy is theoretically a shift away from ideological crusade and toward a bizarre 19th century great power worldview, where America tries to maintain primacy without the capacity to enforce it. In practice, it is unimplementable. Congress opposes it. The deep state opposes it. NATO opposes it. The foreign policy establishment opposes it. Nothing will change in Washington except the language used to describe failure. Russia, China, Iran, and the entire BRICS-driven multipolar order see the cracks widening. They see opportunity. They see a West trying to disguise decline as strategy. Russia has already declared the only acceptable outcome, a permanent settlement based on victory, not a temporary ceasefire that freezes a conflict the West will inevitably reignite. Moscow has no reason to negotiate until its goals are secured on the battlefield, and those goals are being met every day. Europe now understands that the humiliation will belong to them. They are trapped in the war they begged for, abandoned by the United States, retreating into excuses. Russia will finish this war. It will take the Donbass. It will dictate the future borders. It will determine Ukraine's place or lack thereof in the European security architecture. And the world will see that Western hegemony is over. And if we step back and look at the broader picture, the end of Western hegemony is not some abstract academic phrase, but something you can see, measure, and feel in real time through the Ukraine conflict. This war has become the stress test for the entire Western system. Its financial power, its military industrial capacity, its political cohesion, and its information dominance. On every one of those axes, Russia has absorbed the blow, adapted, and pushed through, while the West has exhausted itself chasing illusions, Sanctions were supposed to crush Russia. Instead, they forced Russia to rewire its trade, reindustrialize, upgrade its military production, and deepen ties with Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. Europe, which was promised prosperity and security under the U.S. Umbrella, got deindustrialization, energy crises, soaring costs, and a growing awareness among its citizens that they are paying for Washington's geopolitical games with their living standards. For decades, Western elites told themselves Russia was only a gas station with nukes, a primitive appendage whose political will could be broken by freezing bank accounts and seizing yachts. But when push came to shove, it was Europe that ran out of gas, not Russia. Moscow rerouted its energy, found new partners, and invested in its own financial and technological sovereignty, while European leaders clung to a policy that made their economies dependent on expensive, unstable alternatives just to maintain the fiction of punishing Putin. The war exposed that the much vaunted Western rules-based order is not about rules at all. It is about the expectation that everyone else must obey Western directives, even when they contradict previous promises. NATO's decades of expansion, the dismissal of every Russian security proposal, the refusal to take Moscow's red lines seriously, and then the hysterical reaction when Russia finally acted. All of this made it clear to the rest of the world that Western diplomacy is not about compromise, but about dictation. The global South has been watching closely. They remember Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Yugoslavia. Now they see the same people who destroyed those countries lecturing Russia about international law while openly saying they want strategic defeat for a nuclear power. They see one side that is actually willing to negotiate based on facts on the ground, and another side that uses peace talks as cover for escalation and information warfare. It is no surprise that so many non-Western states lean toward Moscow's narrative, or at least refuse to join the Western crusade. They understand that if Russia falls today, they are next in line tomorrow. Inside Ukraine, the reality behind the heroic slogans is collapse. The Kyiv regime cannot win on the battlefield, cannot protect its own population, cannot provide basic services without Western money, and cannot tell its people the truth about losses without risking instant political implosion. The country has been turned into a sacrificial buffer, its young men thrown into meat grinder assaults to buy a few more weeks of Western talking points. The promise of EU membership and NATO protection has revealed itself as a scam. Ukraine was never going to be integrated as an equal partner. It was always going to be used as a disposable spear pointed at Russia's heart. When that spear snapped, nobody in Washington or Brussels offered to carry the burden of defeat. They began instead to talk about anti-corruption and fatigue, shifting blame onto the very regime they built. Russia, by contrast, has had a simple and brutally consistent strategy. Secure the territories it considers historically and strategically essential, grind down the Ukrainian military, neutralize the NATO infrastructure built on its borders, and demonstrate that no amount of Western pressure can alter those core objectives. That is why Moscow is patient. It does not need public relations victories. It needs durable facts. Every town taken, every encirclement completed, every logistics hub destroyed, every new production line brought online inside Russia is a step toward a post-war settlement that will be dictated from a position of strength, not begged for from a position of weakness. This is also why Russia does not rush into grand declarations. It lets the battlefield speak. The West can publish 1,000 op-eds and spin 1,000 narratives, but none of that changes who controls the ground, who has the manpower reserves, who has the industrial base, and who has the political will to keep going. The uncomfortable truth for Western elites is that they have nothing left to offer Ukraine except slogans. They cannot produce shells fast enough, cannot replace destroyed air defenses fast enough, cannot train new forces fast enough. They can, of course, keep sending money, but that too has political limits, as ordinary citizens in Europe and the United States ask why their taxes are paying for a war that cannot be won, for a regime that cannot be trusted, in a country they barely understood until the propaganda blitz of 2022. Russia understands this fatigue and knows that time is on its side. Every passing month tightens the pressure on Western political systems, while Russia's internal cohesion around this conflict remains largely intact. For Moscow, this war is not some optional foreign adventure. It is framed as an existential struggle over borders, historical identity, and security architecture. For the West, it is a project in managing narratives and maintaining prestige. One side is fighting for its strategic future. The other is fighting to avoid embarrassment. That asymmetry alone makes the final outcome all but inevitable. When the dust settles, Ukraine will not emerge as the triumphant democratic fortress promised by Western politicians. It will be a truncated, exhausted, heavily militarized space whose fate is no longer decided in Kyiv but in negotiations between Moscow and whatever is left of Europe's political class after this humiliation. NATO will claim victory no matter what happens. It always does. But countries in the global south, in Asia, in the Middle East, and even within Europe itself will remember who actually dictated terms in the end. They will remember that Russia absorbed the sanctions, the proxy war, the information onslaught, and still advanced. They will remember that Western leaders swore Russia was isolated, only for Moscow to host summits with dozens of countries eager to trade, invest, and coordinate on a world beyond dollar dominance. The Ukraine war, in that sense, is not just about territory. It is about who writes the next chapter of global order. And whatever polite phrases are used in final communiques, the message will be unmistakable. The era in which the West could unilaterally decide which borders mattered, which wars were legal, and which nations were allowed to defend their own security is over. Russia has proven that it cannot be intimidated, starved, or tricked out of its fundamental interests. That is why the endless Western plans for peace are irrelevant. They do not begin from the reality that Russia has already won strategically, even if the tactical details are still being fought out. Until the West faces that reality, it will keep producing documents, conferences, and declarations that dissolve the moment they meet Russian artillery, Russian drones, and Russian political will. The battlefield, not the Washington think tank circuit, is writing the end of this story, and it is writing it in Russia's favor.